Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Creatives podcast. We're getting into a little bit of systems chat today, and the reason I wanted to record this episode was I am always super super cautious and aware of the conversations that I'm having over and over again with my one-to-one clients, my students in my program Book Not Busy, and I guess just the creatives that I'm around as well. And this is also something that I so deeply experienced when I was in the early stages of my business, but even when I was a little bit more established in business and getting to the point where I was booking bigger projects and, feeling like I was getting all of the demand and I was booking the projects in the way that I wanted to, but there was still this little thing that kept cropping up and really affecting how peaceful I felt in the business, how calm I felt, how steady things could feel, and really what kept me in a cycle of burnout more than anything else. And that is the way that my projects were managed. So what I was finding a lot, and what a lot of my clients find as well, is that we get to this point where we have the projects booked in, we have a great schedule of things in the calendar, we are working with clients we really like, we have things that we're excited about, we're getting to that point where we're getting booked up and feeling really good about being booked up. But then we get into the projects and we have scope creep. We have clients asking for extra revisions or pushing the boundaries on what we can do inside the project. We have timeline drama. We set a project to 6 weeks, but then all of a sudden you don't hear back from a client and it pushes to 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and then maybe you need a week off sick, so it pushes it to 9 weeks, 10 weeks. These are the things that I think create a lot of stress, first of all, inside a creative service business, but also stop us from that idea of getting booked up peacefully. So what I always share in my programs and in the work that I do is that to get booked up peacefully, we want 2 to 3 months of steady bookings with our ideal clients inside a work week that we are really happy to work inside. Where this can affect that goal, I guess, is that if you have a schedule of booked clients in certain timelines in a very specific way, set into some sort of strategy, like what I teach inside Book Not Busy, and then all of a sudden one of those projects ends up being extended by a couple of weeks, you immediately on your hands have an additional 2 weeks of work that you didn't account for. It makes the strategy feel like it's not working as well, and it can often have this snowball effect as well, where one project runs over and then that affects the next project, which affects the next project. And all of a sudden, the idea of getting booked up doesn't feel very appealing anymore. It doesn't feel like it's taken away any stress. It definitely doesn't feel peaceful. And really what I want is for the strategy of being booked up to have that peaceful element as well. Otherwise, we just end up booked and busy, stressed out, burnt out, and really running a business that does not feel good at all. Most of the people that I work with and talk to have everything in place to have a peacefully booked up business. They have, clients that they love working with. They have an incredible offer. They're amazing at what they do. They are experts at what they do. But it's that strategy piece that just doesn't seem to stick. The thing that becomes the struggle and the difficulty in the business is actually the steadiness of those bookings and keeping things really, really streamlined with the project timelines very contained and very steady as well. So I'm going to talk through a few systems that I believe every creative expert should have in their service providing business. And by systems, I don't necessarily mean very set step-by-step processes. I do believe everyone should have those as well. But what I mean is almost like a rule or a strategy for how you manage these different parts in your business. And what these systems do is give you a fallback or give you a plan or give you some foundation of how you manage certain situations inside your business, and more so how you prevent certain things from happening. So how you prevent scope creep in your business, how you prevent timelines being extended, how you prevent your projects overlapping. These are very geared towards that specific issue of, keeping your projects nice and streamlined and tidy and avoiding all of that project messiness and drama. But they can really feed into different parts of the business as well. And every goal that we have in the business should have some sort of systems attached to it that really feed into the full strategy that I love to create for all of my clients. Everyone who listens to this episode or watches the video will have different kind of needs for each different system. It depends what industry you're in. It depends on your creative process. It depends on how you want to live and how you want to work as a human being. But as I go through each of the systems, I would love for you to have a think about what you already have in place that supports these things inside your business. If there's anything that you would tweak or could work a little bit better for you. And also, if it feels like these things aren't working at all, how could you rebuild these systems to actually work for your business and support you to reach your goals, to work the way that you want to have a business that feels really solid, really consistent, and fun to work in as well? We essentially want to get to the point where we feel like we have full control of the business. So things like, projects running over just does not feel like an issue anymore. I know that in some projects, there is the risk of maybe projects running over. Maybe I get sick. I've been sick over the past few months. Maybe there's something that we get stuck on in the creative process. And I know that with having these systems in place, they're either going to prevent those things from being an issue or pull them back when they start to creep in. If I see that a project is running over, some of these systems can jump in and swoop and make that problem go away. Some of them prevent the problem before it even starts. And having these systems in place makes me feel really confident that my schedule can stay booked up peacefully without all of this drama that can come from those messy, unstreamlined projects. So the first system I want to talk about is your work week system. This is something I've definitely shared before. It's about how you plan your work week to make sure you are working exactly as you want to and need to keep your business running really steadily and consistently. We want to make sure we're designing our work week to realistically and practically hold all of the work that we want to do within the boundaries of the way that we want to work as well. I will say one of the main issues that I see in terms of this idea of, keeping all of your projects contained and making sure they all run on track and follow their timelines is that so many of us are just overbooking our own schedule and our work week. And that in itself just creates an impossible cycle where you are never ever going to be able to regain that time. You're never going to be in a position where your projects and your time actually match up. So either you end up working evenings and weekends to catch up on those projects and claw back the timelines as much as you can, or the projects are just inevitably going to run over and create that cycle that I was talking about before, where the next one runs over and then the next one, so on and so forth. You really want to make sure that you're going into the root of your work week and making sure that every single week you have plenty of time to balance all of the projects that you have on, do all of the other things that keep your business running, like your marketing, your admin, answering your emails. And that also you have space to be a human being as well, that you have space to get sick or have an off day or not feel particularly creative one day, and also space for your clients to be humans. If they take an extra day to respond, then you don't have to start stressing about it. Obviously, it's not ideal. We want our clients to try and stick to our processes as much as we can, but it means that as human beings, we can let that slide a couple of times, if it's just a day late. We get this issue when the work week is not necessarily designed, when we let our work happen to us, which, by the way, I was doing for so many years. I was booking in the projects and just assuming that they would fit into the way I wanted to work. And the issue is that I always, without fail, underestimated how long things were going to take. Not because I was slow, or not because I didn't understand that it was hard work, but just because I think we naturally go to the point where we think, I can fit that in. That's not a problem. I can definitely do that. Whereas actually what we want to do is expand that time so everything is absolutely going to work into the week itself. As soon as everything becomes really tightly packed into that work week, even without us knowing, we're already creating a cycle where we can't maintain the timelines on our side because we can't keep up with the level of work that's needed for the schedule and the projects that we have booked in. If you are finding that the work week that you have in place, or the idea that you have, maybe you work on certain things on certain days, or you have certain client days, or you have, shoot days or writing days, whatever that looks like, If it only ever works when everything goes perfectly, you're setting yourself up for a system that doesn't work with any humanness or any tension or difficulty. And a peaceful business is not about not having any difficulties at all. Sure, that would be lovely. I think that's what we all hope for. But it's about knowing how you can stay in control and manage things when they do potentially go not your way or go wrong, and having the systems in place to keep things on track anyway. So if you don't already, I would really recommend setting yourself up a little work week plan where you have a rough idea of how long you spend on projects per week, how long you spend on your marketing, your emails, talking to your clients, sending proposals, all of those things, how long you want to spend per week on each of those tasks, and just really making sure you have plenty of time for all of them. I always think it's nice to keep projects within 1 day per client per week. That might not be realistic for everyone, but it's something to consider when you start looking through things like your timelines and the way that you design and plan your work week. So system number 2 is a boundary system. This one might feel like a bit of a stretch, like what do you mean having systems for boundaries? But especially if you are a person who is prone to people pleasing, or if you find it really difficult to set boundaries, even if it's just something that feels like it crops up and feels difficult when you have to do it in your business, it's really, really great to have some sort of system in place. So here's one that I'm hoping would definitely already have, and that is a contract for your services. Having a contract is already a system for your boundaries because you're listing out before your project starts all of the ways that you would like your project to go and are almost like the rules and terms of working with you. This is a boundary system as well as a, legal document and something that is very, very recommended for everyone to have, because as soon as something is broken in that contract, you get to use that contract as backup. So for example, if feedback is late, if your client wants to change your project timeline, if your client wants to change your project date, all of that should be, hopefully is, covered in your contract. So you can go, well, according to the contract, this is something that we have to, keep in place, or this is the date for that thing that I need, all of those sorts of things. That's the clear one. Having the contract is kind of the main thing that most of us will have. But what I would also recommend is having systems whereby you also know how to respond to certain situations. So whether it's having canned messages, like templated messages that you can send over when feedback is late or when your clients ask for things that aren't included in the project. Basically anything that creates a difficult message for you to write. And it could be that you find writing these messages and setting boundaries really easy. Absolutely great if that is the case. I still think it's really valuable to have these systems in place so you can pull from them if you are ever, low on energy, or if you feel like you're balancing too much and can't keep in control of things. It's those energetic times and spaces that can make these things a little bit harder. And having these systems in place, things that you can messages that you can just copy and paste, contract terms that you can quote, even having a page on your website or in a guide, a process guide or something like that to talk through how your projects go for each and every client. All of these things just give us stability and give us security in the boundaries. The first tricky bit about setting a boundary is setting the boundary. The second bit is having things in place that back up that boundary as well. And I think they kind of come hand in hand as well. As soon as we have this solidified piece in a contract or in a process guide or in, having some sort of to-do list for your clients, all of those things give us structure that makes the first step, which is setting the boundary, feel a lot easier to do. So a little step here, if this is something you don't currently have in place or is something you want to update, what I would recommend is make yourself a little list of the situations that you find crop up more often than you would like them to inside your projects. Is it late feedback? Is it missing deadlines? Is it your clients not giving helpful feedback? Or are they missing calls or something like that? Have a think of any situation that tends to crop up in your projects, anything that you essentially don't want to happen again, and figure out if you can add a contract clause to cover that thing happening, or write a templated message to chase up your client for certain things or remind them of the process inside your project. Okay, the third system I'm going to talk through, this one is actually more of an actual system, and that is a project management system. I believe every service provider should have some sort of project management system. I know a lot of people use Notion at the moment, which works absolutely fine. A lot of my clients use Asana because that's what I use. It's basically just having a space where you can keep your project in one place, you can keep everything on track, you can communicate with your client, you can have an allocated space where you go and manage each project that you are working on, and it just adds a little bit of a foundation and a structure to projects that may otherwise be ran in, floating around email threads or WhatsApp messages, or even taking place in like 4 or 5 different spaces on the internet, which just feels really difficult to control. We really want a space where we're grounding our projects into the same area for both us and for our clients. It has to be said that a lot of times our clients, especially if we're working with people who we really like, they're not trying to push our buttons, they're not trying to bend our boundaries, they're not trying to give us a hard time inside projects. Often it's just that they haven't been communicated with around expectations for the project or boundaries around the project. Most people that I have worked with, as soon as I set a boundary, they're absolutely fine with that boundary and they don't have to worry about it again. But without understanding what those things are throughout the project, it's really difficult for our clients to actually know what we need from them. So the tool that I use for project management, like I said, I use Asana. Lots of different places do something similar. It gives a list of tasks that we both need to complete throughout the project, and I can set deadlines. I can assign my tasks to my client or to myself. There are automated reminders to check in for things like feedback and, just making sure that the project is on track. I can also share information about my expectations for the project. And giving that information and keeping it all in one space allows my client to feel like the project is just as streamlined on their end as it is on mine. And that means that they are more likely to be able to move through those processes. I think I have found in the past that projects tend to extend or go past their timelines when there are kind of murky expectations between the two of us, between me and my client, and they don't really know what to expect. When my clients don't really know what comes next, don't know what the process is, we have to remember our clients are working with us most of the time for the first time ever. And so they are new to the process. Even though we have worked through it over and over again with lots of different clients, they haven't. So it's really good to make sure you have a space where all of that is laid out and really clear. And then finally, when we feel like we have to constantly chase things manually, when we are following up with tasks, following up with payments, and in one project and then in another area, we're chasing up proposals and having inquiry calls. There's so much to manage in a business. You really want to make it as easy for yourself as possible. And using automations in some sort of system like this is just a really great way of doing that. The next system I want to talk about is having an offer system. Again, the word system is kind of used, it's not a loose term, but it is used in a way that I want you to have some sort of strategy and plan behind the scenes of how all of these things work. The way an offer system works is by making sure that built into the business, built into the offers, and built into the way that you work with your clients is a system to keep everything on track and stick to those timelines. And really at the root of this is how your offer is built. Because at the end of the day, if you have a 6-week offer that actually always ends up taking you 8 weeks, the problem is in the offer itself. It's inside the promise of that offer to take 6 weeks when you actually need a couple of extra weeks to get that done. I don't tend to find that the people I work with and talk to don't have offer systems at all. Most people I work with have some sort of timeline. They have a guide for their process that they want to stick to. They have an idea of how the flow of creativity goes throughout the project and when they need feedback and things like that. The issue is that it's not completely set in stone and paired with the workweek system that we talked about before to make sure that you always have plenty of space to deliver the projects, to work through the projects, and give yourself a little bit of breathing room just in case things go awry here and there. You really want to make sure that inside your offers, you have a really, really clear idea of exactly how long everything is going to take, exactly how much time you want to set aside for each part of the project. even really repeatable parts of your offers, so you know that each piece will always take this long and you can use this template or you can use this program or this system to make sure you are working through in a very repeatable, systemized way. As creatives, that repeatability and that systemization of our offers can sometimes feel a little bit tricky. You know, we're designing brands that are different sizes. We are writing website copy for different sized websites. We are taking part in shoots that can have different scope. All of us are going to have different elements to how much work we have to do throughout the project, but we want to keep it as repeatable and as set in stone as possible. If that means you only ever give yourself 2 days to pull together logo concepts, or you only ever give yourself a full week to work on the first draft of a website project, for example, you can set that in place knowing how long things generally take and give yourself a system that makes these projects more repeatable, which makes it more likely that you're going to be able to stick to those timelines for every single project. Again, going back to this idea of a peaceful, spacious service is not necessarily just about making sure everything goes perfectly. It's making sure that you have plans in place when maybe your client takes up a little bit more of the revisions compared to a different client, or a website that you're working on is a much bigger website than before. You want to make sure that you're always prepared for the nuance and the difference in all of your projects, even with the same offer, and make sure that that's always planned for and scheduled in this sort of system. Okay, our final system, and this is one that is maybe the least systemized piece out of all of them, but I want you to have a system for who your ideal clients are. And this might be one that feels a little bit left field, but the main thing I have found about collaborating with clients is that the clients that are most happy to stick to my processes, to my timelines, to the plans that I have in place for every project are my absolute dream clients. Not because they stick to the timelines, obviously that helps, but because they have so much respect for my process, they understand, they are happy to put me in the seat of being the expert, they want to follow my processes because they want the best of my work, and they are great to work with because they are businesses and brands that I love, but also because they are so incredibly respectful of my time, of my expertise, of my processes, and they are so keen to keep everything on track because they want both my best work and they want their projects at the end. So how can this be a system? The first thing is really considering who your ideal clients are. So having a really clear idea of who it is that you would love to work with, whether it's the type of businesses, the level of business, the experience, the locations, all of the things that make your ideal clients who they are. So as soon as you get an inquiry through in your contact form, you can have a really good idea of, yes, this is a great fit client, or no, this maybe isn't a project for me. Because it's those ones that we're unsure about, which, I mean, often are referred to as like a red flag client. I don't really like that term. I think often it's just a mismatch of the expert and the client. But if you have a really good idea of who is a good fit and who isn't, it means that you can kind of nip that in the bud before the project even begins. If you know you are collaborating with people who are the best clients for you to work with, it's much more likely that you are going to be able to have a steadier, more streamlined project with them because, again, they follow the processes, they're more respectful of your time, all of those things. The main system I would have in place here is actually more of like a vetting process before your projects begin or before you actually book the project into your schedule. So a really robust inquiry form where you can get as much information about the client as possible and really decide whether they are or aren't a good fit client. Having a really great consultation call process, questions that get into the depths of the business, the goals of the business or the person that you're working with if you don't work with brands and businesses, and making sure that you are really aligned on the vision for the project as well. And then finally, I guess part of it is just making sure that your business is built to attract the people who you really love working with, you know, in your messaging and in your positioning. This is less of a system, but more something to be considering as you move through your business. So the people that you tend to attract will generally always be your ideal clients, and it makes the vetting process a lot easier. So wrapping it up there, they're the 5 systems that I would consider adding into your business to keep your projects on track and to keep you booked up peacefully instead of booked and busy and burnt out and stressed out all at the same time. It might feel right now like a lot to be thinking about how you build 5 different systems into your business, but it actually all comes back to the strategy of the business itself. And if you are thinking about each of these pieces with a almost like wider lens, you know, thinking big picture, not just thinking project to project or like on a client by client basis, but really considering how each of these things is baked into the business, how it comes into the strategy of your business. So you can solve these problems that crop up over and over again with a system that tackles the problem at the root and almost builds on the strategy that you have in your business as a whole. Because yes, we can go through business solving each problem one at a time. We can look at each client as an isolated case. We can look at each project as being a completely different experience from the next. But the truth is, if you really look into the depth of where things don't quite feel right in your business, usually there are common threads that come back to the same sort of thing. So if you are finding that this project scope creep is an issue or the timeline's running over is a real big problem for you, there are things that we can look at in the foundations of the business, like these systems that I've shared today, that can actually have a really incredible follow-on impact and make the business as a whole more steady, more solid, more consistent, and help you feel so much more in control than you may have done before. If you are looking to build a robust and solid and sustainable strategy with all of these systems included in your creative business, this is exactly what we build inside Book Not Busy, my group program. We build a system and a strategy whereby you can get and stay booked up peacefully whilst working the ideal work week that we talk about, working with the dream clients that we talk about, and leaving behind the burnout that we're so used to being trapped in the cycles of. All of these systems are covered inside the program, including pulling in some of the things around messaging and positioning to book your ideal clients, confidence boosts to make you feel like an incredible creative expert, and frameworks and tools so you can actually make all of this work uniquely for your business and yourself as a creative. It's not about all of us building the same business, working the same strategy, and getting from the same A to the same B. I want you to be building a business that feels really sustainable, feels really steady, and really enjoyable for you as a creative and for you as a person, so you can actually live the life that you really want to live. I will add a link to the waitlist for the program in the show notes or the notes below. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you want to talk about any of those systems, if anything feels unclear, or like I said, if there are things that you feel like you have in place but for some reason they just don't seem to be working, I would love to talk about that with you. You can find me over on Instagram at Gatto Creative Mentor. I'm also on YouTube under the same exact name. I will be back next week with another one of these episodes. And as always, if there's anything that you want to hear me talking about, please feel free to let me know. If there's anything that would be really helpful for you to build a more burnout-proof creative business, that is exactly what I am here for. Like I said, I'll be back next week. Really hope you enjoyed this one. I'll speak to you soon.